Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Rory Stewart. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute here at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. A quick note that pizza will be served at the end of today's forum. And today's forum is called Dialogue on Human Rights, where we will be discussing the right to subsistence and the right to science. This is an incredibly important topic today. We are thrilled to welcome some of the world's best minds to engage in this conversation. It is my honor to welcome our panelists. First, we have Professor Elizabeth Ashford. She is a senior lecturer in philosophy at the University of St. Andrews. She did her PhD at Oxford University and has been a faculty fellow in ethics at Harvard University Edmund J. Safra Foundation Center for Ethics, an HLA Hart visiting fellow at Oxford University Center for Ethics, and the Philosophy of Law, and a Lawrence S. Rockefeller Visiting Fellow at Center for Human Values at Princeton University. Her primary research interests are in moral and political philosophy, and her recent work has focused on the human right to subsistence. She participated in a UNESCO research program called Towards a New Paradigm in the Fight Against Poverty, which argued for conceiving life-threatening poverty as a violation that demands abolition. She also participated in a UNESCO panel discussion on poverty and infrahumanization in Mexico City at the recent World Ethics Conference in China on the theme of global ethical responses to urgent contemporary challenges. She's also currently completing a monograph, Hunger's Witting Executioners, Structural Violations of the Human Right to Subsistence. Next, Professor Hella Porsdam. She is a professor of history and cultural rights at the Faculties of Humanities and Law at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, where she also holds the UNESCO chair in the right to science. She did her PhD in American Studies at Yale University and has been a liberal arts fellow twice at the Harvard Law School. In 2021, she was the Leverhulme visiting professor at the University of Cambridge, and before that, she was the Global Ethics Fellow at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs in New York City. Porsdam has written extensively on cultural rights, especially the right to science. Among her most recent work are the monographs, The Transforming Power of Cultural Rights and the Science as a Cultural Human Right, her co-authored volume, Scientific Freedom, the Heart of the Right to Science, and her co-edited volume, The Right to Science, Then and Now. Though little known, the human right to science offers, Porsdam argues, the basis for defending the free and responsible practice of science and ensuring its benefits are spread globally. She actively works together with UNESCO to support science as a common global good. Today's conversation will be moderated by Professor Dean Chatterjee. He's been a faculty affiliate at Oxford Consortium for Human Rights at the Institute for Ethics, Law, and Armed Conflict at Oxford University. He was a senior fellow at the S.J. Quincy College of Law at the University of Utah until 2020. Earlier, he was a Global Ethics Fellow at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs in New York City and philosophy faculty at the University of Utah. His research and publications in political philosophy and normative jurisprudence focus on theories of global justice, especially in the intersections of human rights, democracy, justice, and war and peace. The Hinckley Institute would like to thank Professor Chatterjee for his leadership on today's event. I will turn it over to him to get us started, but first join me in welcoming our guests.
I don't need that, do you? Thank you, Larry, for the wonderful introduction. Okay, really. I'm Dean Chatterjee. I'll be the one moderating the forum today. It will be mostly a conversation between our two great scholars. We are so glad, lucky to have them over here from Europe and from the UK, from Copenhagen and from St. Andrews, Scotland. And of course, you have heard their intro already, so you know who they are. So I'd like to just mention one thing, that today's conversation on human rights in the context of sustainability and the right to the sciences, it's a prelude to a big lecture tomorrow at Westminster University, starting at 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. at Vivek Gore Concert Hall. It will be followed by a reception, and the talk is known as the Tanner McMillan Lecture. It's quite a well-known lecture. We have had this here before, and also in the law school in the past. This year at Westminster College, and they're the ones who are sponsoring the talk and also sponsoring our speakers right over here today. We're very thankful to them. And you will find information about the lecture tomorrow at 7 p.m. right over here on the table up there, And you are most welcome to attend that. You will really, really like that event there. So just one point about Tanner and Sterling McMurray, in whose names the lecture is over there. Tanner was a philosophy faculty right over here on this campus, and he, in fact, died just before I joined the department. But Sterling McMurray, in whose honor Obert endowed the money at Westminster to have this very prestigious lecture, Sterling McMurray was our colleague. Eventually, from philosophy, he moved to history department. And he also very much believed in the ideas that our two great speakers are going to espouse today on the right to science and this idea of cultural rights. And the right to science is part of our access to global culture and to have access to knowledge and to embolden democracy. He was a great believer in that, and we'll be hearing about him, if not today in the conversation, surely tomorrow in the lecture. So with that introduction, I would not like to take any time. I would like to see that they get into some conversation over there. And of course, we have a great audience over here. And you're most encouraged to come up with your comments. And from time to time, we'll be asking you for your comments. And maybe once in a while, as a moderator, I'll be putting in my comments as well, okay? So it's going to be a great program today. Let's go for that today. Thanks. Okay? So you go ahead, two of you, as you'd like to proceed, okay? Sitting there or coming over here, I don't know how it's going to go.
Would you like? You start, like tomorrow. I'm sorry. Do you want to start? Yeah, you start.
I think it's fine to just sit here.
Sit here, fine. Yeah. Very good, yeah.
So first of all, what a pleasure it is to be here. And with that kind of view, how can you even listen to us? It's amazing. I come from a country that is totally flat. We have no mountains at all. So this is so beautiful by comparison. I'm thrilled to be here. It's wonderful. I'm a professor of history and cultural rights, and it means that I teach mostly American history when I'm in the history department at the University of Copenhagen. And when I'm then in the law school, I teach human rights and legal philosophy and certain other things. So I have those two parts of my life that somehow also often come together, but not always. But today it's not about American history. Today it's about the right to science, which is a very little known human right. Have you ever heard about it before? You didn't know that there was such a thing, right? No. It's actually mentioned in the Universal Declaration. It's not something I'm making up. It's mentioned in the Universal Declaration, and also in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So 2 out of the 3 founding human rights instruments mentioned, and the wording is something like everybody has the right to benefit from scientific progress and its products. It's an interesting time to think about the role of science right now. I myself have been interested in various aspects of this, such as, for example, scientific freedom. As a scholar, I'm obviously very interested in that. And the right to science is mentioned directly, protected directly in these foundational documents in a way that academic freedom isn't, for example. When we talk about human rights, from a human rights perspective, academic freedom has to be inferred from other rights. But we do have scientific freedom, which is mentioned right there in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So I don't know how long you would like me to talk for.
It's between the 2 of you right now.
Yeah.
Keep on going, and of course, I'd like to see Elizabeth, then starts talking and interact amongst the 2 of you, and then we'll just bring in comments to support you with what you say, So you go ahead and ask questions to Elizabeth, or you say a few more things, and then Elizabeth joins you.
Okay. And another thing that I'm very interested in with regard to the right to science is the possibility of science, looking at science as a public common good, a good that is there for all of us. And it doesn't take long when you do research on these issues before issues of ownership come up. Who actually owns this? And intellectual property issues come up, and things concerning copyright, patents, trademarks, and so on. Who owns this? And there's a big problem today with regard to science as a common global good, which is that much of it is behind paywalls, and you actually have to pay for it, to use it. So access is a problem. Not everybody around the world has equal access to what is going on in the world of scholarship and science, the possibility of looking at science as through a human rights lens makes it possible for us to talk about science as a public good, something that is there for everybody. It also means that in order for people to understand this, it has to be, scientific knowledge has to be translated, has to be disseminated in such a way that people actually understand what is going on in the world of science. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a right to science. This is something that we know the drafters of the Universal Declaration and the 2 international covenants were very interested in. Making sure that people have their right to science means engagement between scholars and the public in such a way that the public has a chance of understanding what's going on. So do you want to?
Sure,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, I'd like to reiterate it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. So my focus is on another of the rights in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the right to subsistence, which is the most basic of the economic rights. So by subsistence is just meant the basic essentials of life. So adequate food, sufficient water, safe uncontaminated water, safe air, and protection from the elements. And one thing I've been particularly interested in is why this right isn't treated with the same seriousness as what are called civil and political rights, or they're sometimes called negative rights, such as the right to freedom of expression and participation, but also the right against torture, the right against assault, and so on. So one aspect of that is that these rights impose primarily negative duties not to harm people, whereas the right to subsistence is generally thought of as a right to the provision of subsistence. But it should be emphasized the right to subsistence is also a negative right against behavior that actively deprives people of subsistence. And the impact of actively being deprived of subsistence because your water supply is poisoned, your air supply is poisoned, or you no longer have access to fertile land because of climate change, for instance. The impact of that is just as serious as that of the most grievous physical assault, and also causes millions of deaths. So that's one puzzling feature of why it's, I find it, not treated with the same seriousness. And why in particular the notion of a human rights violation is extremely rarely applied to violations of the right to subsistence, even when you are focusing on human behavior that's predictably and avoidably actively depriving people of the means of subsistence. I also think that the right does impose positive duties because in a world of plenty, it seems an affront to human dignity for some people to lack any realistic chance of a minimally decent life because of poverty so extreme that they can't afford the basic essentials of life. So living below the international poverty line, which is now, I think it's $3.20 a day at purchasing power parity in the USA. So it's what you could purchase with $3 in the US.
One thing, could I just step in one thing, I would like to say that you talk a bit about this issue of justice as well, because rights they just don't hang in the air by themselves. Rights are about dignity, equality, and we have to maximize rights to make sure that people have their due dignity, due identity, and some form of equality, okay? But at the same time, equality is not enough. We have to understand that in the context of equity. That's where justice comes in. So there's a balance between rights and justice. And we know that in so many ways, the rights cannot be maximized in the same way for everybody because the idea of justice comes in and there it balances the two sides together. So given that factor, how would you then say in the world these two factors are playing out, especially in our divided world, when we see that we are trying to maximize everything on this side of the globe, the other side is left practically nothing or barren, even though in the ancient times, the East and the global South, including Africa, Latin America, the native cultures, they all believe in a very holistic form of life that included earth, water, nature, everything, along with the sustainability issues. And surely science was there. I mean, they had their own developed science in a very important way. We need to go back and take a look at that. That's all dismantled now because we have a different idea of science. Now it's taken over by this idea of computer science and these companies, all that. That is not quite the idea that the framers of the human rights folks early on said, including, of course, FDR in the early days in America, when he talked about rights to science as part of sustaining knowledge for lifting up people's ability, to sustain themselves and to go for what he said to enhance economic rights, and people's well-being, okay? So all of those were together. But that's where the question comes. If that be the case, how come the global South, where so much of that developed in the early days and so much of the West owes to the global South, they're deprived of that? And how do we bring in that idea of equity in the global system? And whose responsibility is that? Is that a collective responsibility or individual? And how the collective side and the individual, they join hands and go together. Because we know that there are all types of agencies. One is called benign agency or passive agency, where we know that we are part of that, but there's nothing we can do about it. But the other one is called the moral agency, where we know that we have a direct responsibility to do something about it, See, in what way those things count when it comes to these big global issues and systemic issues, So these are huge questions, and that's where we have the world's two leading speakers and scholars here who have done so much work on that. We'd like to hear a bit from them on that. I don't know whether I have made myself clear, because there's so much to say. And by the way, three of us, we have been working together on these issues for quite a while. If I can mention a bit about Niels Bohr, the guru, the spiritual mentor of Oppenheimer, who got us the bomb, Niels Bohr was the father, so to speak, of atom bomb and all that. At the same time, he was more well known for his tireless effort on promoting peace, global peace, So it just shows how much he saw the way science can enhance our quality of life and bring in global peace. That's an example. And that is, of course, he was Danish, where, Professor Potsdam comes from. And in fact, the royal family in Denmark once, to celebrate 50 years of Niels Bohr's famous letter to the United Nations, held a conference in the Royal Palace. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to give a talk there, along with all the top leaders and global scholars and scientists in the world, And of course there, Professor Potsdam was there with us. We have been together into all that. So we see that example of that could happen with the rightful way of leadership that Niels Bohr showed us. Where is that going on today? So if we could comment a bit on that,
Well, we're having the next Niels Bohr Open World Conference in November, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, right.
So celebrating the 75th anniversary of the open letter.
Right, exactly, right.
And that issue of openness is important, because right now in many places we are told, at my university, for example, that we cannot work together with Russian colleagues, and there are, when it comes to hiring, we have to be very conscious about where people are from, also certain countries. And that is a direct assault on that openness. Science is global, and we can only do our science, our scholarship, when we know what's happening, what colleagues do around the world. And that includes indigenous knowledge, that includes local knowledge. We need, if we are going to solve climate change, and we're in this mess together, it's a truly global thing, then we do need all the knowledge that is out there. So for Niels Bohr, openness was about creating trust. That was the only way he saw trust being created in a world. And he obviously saw the Cold War coming and was trying to say to world leaders, let's be open about the atomic bomb, the kind of research that's going on there. That's the only way we can prevent what then turned into a Cold War. So trust for him was a big issue. You mentioned human dignity, Dean, before, which of course is what's so important to keep in mind when we talk about human rights, is that they are legal rights, but they're also principles. That underlying those human rights, those legal rights, are fundamental principles of human values, such as dignity, such as equality, such as non-discrimination. So that is one of the reasons why I'm very interested in human rights. It's a hopeful discourse, especially the universal part of it, I think, at a time where we are so polarized in the world, in many societies, that discourse, that way of speaking human rights has a certain promise. And part of that universality is, of course, to make sure that people around the world get access to, in my case, the right to science. It's true that it was actually FDR who first, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the first person we know of who mentioned science as something of a right. He didn't call it the right to science, but something close to that. And it then became part of what later in this is something he mentioned in his first, his Four Freedoms State of the Union speech. And then afterwards, 3 years later, he followed that up by suggesting a second Bill of Rights or economic Bill of Rights, which has somehow been forgotten, I think. Are you guys aware of the second Bill of Rights? No. Some of you are. But it's kind of been forgotten, I think, in the American context. But those four freedoms, of course, went directly into international human rights law, in part through his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was heading the committee that came up with that wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So for Franklin D. Roosevelt, science was a way, as Dean said, to better your circumstances, to make sure that you could learn something and you could use that to better the circumstances for yourself and your family. So for him, it was an economic right. So the kind of justice aspect of it, I think, comes in also in my case for Professor Ashford. It's a different issue, or you go at it from a different angle. But again, I would point to the intellectual property issues that are so prevalent today. That when science becomes something that is privatized, taken out of the public domain by means of being either copyrighted or patented for a period of time, others have to pay for it. And I was just at a panel in Oslo, Norway, not too long ago with several colleagues from Africa who kept saying that how difficult it was for them to actually do their research because everything was behind paywalls. They had no access to the kind of scientific knowledge that is out there, and so they had difficulty pursuing science. So that kind of what intellectual property does there is not a good thing. It creates very good circumstances for some people in the global north, but it means that in the global south and in certain other places, getting access to scientific knowledge is very, very difficult. So these are issues that I think, that is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the right to science. I think we can use this particular human right to address those issues. And the wonderful thing to me about human rights is also that human rights will always clash with each other. So you have the possibility through the human rights language to actually have different interests voiced. And to, if possible at all, in a respectful manner, try to find the right balance between different human rights and different people's human rights.
Helle, if we could talk also in that context, that difference between scientists, right to science, versus scientism, that is not quite what right to science means, but often it degenerates into that, and that brings our quality of life down, So can you talk a bit about the difference that leads to what Liz, is going to talk about,
Yeah. It's, a lot of people around the world are naturally afraid of what's happening in the world of especially the natural sciences and technology. What are they producing? Are you familiar with the term dual-use science? Yes, okay. So science that can be used for something good, but also something bad. And atomic energy, I think, is a wonderful example of that, which, to go back to Niels Bohr, is, of course, what he saw. Mm-hmm. So part of what people interested in the right to science are interested in is precisely, does the right to science also make it possible through citizen science, for example, through people's participation, the public's participation in science, to spot early on possible dual-use science, and thus to prevent it. So science is part of the cause as well as part of the cure sometimes, and that is something that we need to be that we need to recognize also. So there again, I think the right to science offers us a promising human right through which we can address these issues of dual-use science, of how do we prevent that in such a way that is still to balance it with scientific freedom, which is also there. We want to make sure that science happens and that, when we go to a hospital today, it's in everybody's interest that modern science, modern health science, whatever technology works. So we very much need that, but we also need to make sure that it is checked in such a way that it doesn't end up as dual-use science that can be misused in such a way that it's no longer beneficial for mankind.
Liz, would you like to comment on that sustainability side?
Sure, yeah. Yes. Just to begin with the reference to Niels Bohr and Oppenheimer, it always makes me think about Hannah Arendt quotation that we need to think what we're doing, that we can end up hurtling towards disasters that everyone realizes is a disaster. And there doesn't have to be any kind of malign intention behind it, but just a lack of thinking what we're doing globally. And that's where the law is particularly important as well, to put in the regulations needed. And one of the aspects of Hannah's work that's so important is she really brings out the responsibility of science as well, to think about its foundation in human well-being and how it can serve human well-being. And that actually relates to what you were asking about at the beginning about different knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge, and the ways in which practices that were a lot more good at conserving the environment in Africa and so on were considered by the colonialists to be backwards, and that whole kind of knowledge system was degraded. And now, of course, we know what kind of damage that can lead to. So I think an important part of your question about why is there this massive disparity has to involve looking at the history of colonialism, which had many components. So one was the material impact of plunder of resources. Another was the impact on social institutions of the coercive imposition of extractive social institutions to extract money for the colonies. But a third was this kind of epistemic dominance and downgrading of indigenous systems of knowledge and different systems of ownership of resources, where it was considered a global commons that everyone should have access to. I think it's just really important that property rights don't become divorced from their basis in well-being and indeed survival.
Maybe we should get some questions, you know. We have our Mayor Rocky Anderson here who'd like to ask a question. I'm sure lots of other questions, but we'd like to start with some students first, you know. Students would like to ask some question. Okay, there's a microphone, okay.
Hi, I have a question. So, do you think that if we make science more accessible, would that hinder innovation? For example, the US, we know we're a highly capitalistic country. However, we drive the most innovation in healthcare, for example, and I think it's because of the money that comes with it. So, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I don't think it will. I think innovation is important. I mean, and again, you know, I think the very fact that we have to think in terms of scientific freedom too means that we have to make sure that the right kind of science is happening. That's in everybody's interest. And we are absolutely in need of good technology as well. I mean, everything that's happening around AI is a good example of that. But what's important is also that, that the knowledge is shared and that it doesn't turn into something bad that is no longer beneficial for human beings. So I think as long as that is taken into account, if innovators start thinking about those human elements too, one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the right to science is that it was characterized as a cultural human right. It's mentioned side by side in the big documents alongside the right to participate in culture. So the framers saw science as part of culture. And that means that we can actually look at science from a human rights perspective and squeeze in human-centered, ethical kind of things at the same time. So I don't see them as being, I think it's just another way of thinking into the picture, this kind of thing.
To add something to that, for example, the UNESCO, you know, by the way, Hele is the UNESCO chair on the right to science. That's a big position and big honor. But UNESCO is very much into this right to science and right to culture and knowledge that science generates. I'll underline that to mention. But also, UNESCO is really big on sustainability, and Elizabeth has participated in so many UNESCO forums and projects on sustainability, and you can talk perhaps a bit on that too, that to show how the two sides come together, you know. Did I misguide you? Or?
No, sorry. Just the...
The UNESCO, your projects in UNESCO on sustainability, and UNESCO is big on the right to science as well.
Yeah.
So the two sides, of course, that go together, UNESCO is very mindful of that, you know, and that's what exactly both of you are talking about, you know.
But also the question that was asked, if you want to address that.
Right, that relates to, of course, the question asked, you know,
Yeah.
about innovation, whether that there's something so positive, but does that often degenerate into scientism, you know?
Yeah. I mean, on that question, I think you're right that capitalism has driven a lot of innovation, but I don't think it has to be the only driver. I mean, one thing we were talking about yesterday was all those scientists that put so much effort into finding a vaccine for COVID, hours and hours and hours. And they weren't doing it to make money, they were doing it because they saw that the world needed their expertise, which is a great example of what global cooperation can achieve, motivated by the common good.
Right. Okay, in the back, yes.
So the question that I have is mainly a two-part question. I agree with you on right to science, but you know that money, science costs money. People have to be able to pay for that. You mentioned COVID. The government ended up paying for that. So somebody had to pay for the supplies, pay the people, pay the hours. What is the solution to be able to continue to move science forward, but still give access to everybody, while let's say somebody else innovates something that's new and cutting, and there's no longer patents that are going to protect them, and another company that's just a startup, oh, okay, well, we see this, and now we see one part to do quicker, but they spent billions learning how to do this, and another company comes in, that company's going to go under. Where do you take that and balance that to where we can continue to grow science and everything else as well? So I hear, you know, a problem, but I don't hear a solution.
Right, good question.
Wonderful question, but
Yeah.
both of your questions,
Yeah.
because that's where the problem is in so many ways. Just to come back to what you asked about also, scientific freedom comes with responsibility. So scientists are, from a human rights perspective, obliged to also feel responsible for their research. What can it be used for eventually? Which goes a ways, I think, to put into those human-centered issues. Right now, I'm working with my son, who is also working on right to science issues, and an attorney from California who is an IP lawyer, intellectual property lawyer, working with Silicon Valley. And we're trying to figure out, is there a common way? Is there a way in which we can bridge the gap between science as an open kind of thing, access to everything, open access, and intellectual property? And we think that, for instance, something like limitations is something you can work toward. You know, that you don't have copyright ad nauseam forever and ever and ever and for longer and longer periods, for example. That's one thing. Another thing is that there are other ways in which you can draw into, you can use a right to science approach to create certain limits for intellectual property. I think it's possible, actually, to find that both intellectual property and the right to science have common roots. You know, even the US Constitution talks about intellectual property also, and the way in which it has to further progress of society and science and culture. So there's a common history there, that what we want is to make it valuable for people to be creative. And that's how, you know, the intellectual property started. The history behind it was to make sure that there was an incentive for people to be creative. But that can be limited, I think, and we can squeeze into that we can use existing law, I think, to limit that in such a way that it does make it possible to make science more open and accessible for everybody.
Okay. I know quite a few questions over there. Just perhaps one question for Mayor Anderson right now, and then we'll go back to the students, then again, maybe Professor Jackson after that.
Thank you. Thank you. If it makes any sense to speak about these rights as being beyond mere aspirational values, then for each right there must be a remedy. And where are the remedies when our national leaders in this country are blatantly lying to the people, misleading and manipulating public opinion around an existential issue like the climate crisis? Where is the remedy in Salt Lake City when people freezing to death during the winter who have nowhere else to go to find shelter are dying winter after winter, and it's become normalized in this community? Where are the remedies when we speak about these rights to subsistence? And this goes to what you both spoke about in your introductory comments.
Would
Great
you like to
question.
start? Yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah. Do you have any additional thoughts?
It's a great question, as we would expect from a former mayor, you know,
Yeah.
of the
That is
city.
a
Thanks for
great
not calling me the old man.
Yeah.
Human rights have always been aspirational, and the Achilles tendon of human rights is exactly that. What are the remedies? But you can still see, even aspirational as they are, I think they can be used to talk about these things and to bring out things in the open. Remedies are hard. It's hard to what exactly does the right to science mean? What does the right to subsistence mean in practice? And that is something we're trying to work on, to perhaps find court cases. I'm of the opinion that certain of the litigation that's going on in terms of climate change could be litigated on a right to science basis, for example. So we're trying, but it's hard, and you are quite right. Where are the remedies?
Yes, over there. You. Yes.
Hi.
Yeah, here's the microphone.
You talked a lot about the responsibilities of scientists to work with and be responsible for what they put out into the world. And you also mentioned how you are hurt that you can't work with your Russian colleagues. But that raises my question of how can we police scientists in foreign countries and other parts of the world where we may not be welcomed in to look at what they're researching? And with the right to science, sharing what we know to the world, what if they're not sharing back and they use what they are researching to further their war in Russia? How do we police them, basically? Thank you.
It's not a matter of pleasing, I don't think. It's a matter of having respect and having them draw them into the kind of research, ask their permission to use certain parts of, say, traditional knowledge or certain other things, and to talk to them. To talk to them and have them, and also try to be open toward the knowledge that they come with. So I think respect is the most important part when it comes to that. But human rights are universal, and you will find some of the UN special rapporteurs in the field of cultural rights who have written on these issues. They keep saying also that yes, indigenous knowledge should also be shared. It's in a universal kind of human rights framework. It goes both ways. Mm-hmm. But I think respect, talk, dialogue is the way forward.
We should take questions from this side. Yeah, way back in the back.
If you're familiar at all with the America Invents Act, do you think some sort of reform of the America Invents Act could bridge the gap that you're talking about between innovation and public access?
Remind me of that act.
It's the shift from the first to file, or first to invent, to the first to file system in the United States.
Right.
I don't know enough about it. I have to say, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just one more question on this side, yes. In the middle, yes.
Earlier, you talked about how openness and transparency regarding the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb could have prevented the nuclear Cold War. What would you have to say to the nuclear optimists who say, well, nuclear weapons have actually made the world a safer place through the power of deterrence?
I personally would say that it's a different situation today. That kind of argumentation may have worked during the Cold War, but it doesn't work anymore today. We have a totally different situation. But for Niels Bohr, the most important thing was creating trust. And he thought that world leaders might actually learn from the kind of trust that is there in the scientific world among colleagues, where it doesn't matter where you're from, it's about the science. And if we can talk about that, you know, we get away from this kind of polarization and all kinds of other stuff too. So it was a way of creating trust and thus listen to each other once there is trust. But trust has to be there first. And for him, that was what openness could create.
Any question on the sustainability front for Professor Ashford? Yes, you have a question for her.
When we talk about sustainability, and you mentioned, I believe, a $3.21 number, how do we determine what the world needs in different places to qualify as their sustainable rights?
That is supposed to be, well, there's a lot of debate about how you come up with these figures, as you could imagine. But it's supposed to take into account what you actually need to fulfill your basic needs. And that's going to depend on the circumstances of your society. But yeah, that's supposed to have been included within that figure. But the multi-dimensional poverty index is widely regarded as a much better way of measuring extreme poverty, because that looks directly at what people need to realize their capacities and capabilities.
On this side, Sherry, you wanted to raise a question earlier?
Back to the question around science, I'm curious on the input side. I've worked in international education for many years, and one of the things that came up repeatedly, as you stated, the cost of scientific journals. I've heard from many faculty in other countries they can't get to those journals because they're prohibitively expensive. But also, and also speaking to the colonialism, English is lingua franca in so many of these scientific fields means that textbooks, so on the education side, access to that education where they have textbooks, the facility in English, which is where those textbooks are, what they're written in, and the ability to get to that information in so many countries is really infeasible. So is there any discussion? I realize AI probably helps on the translation side, but access, especially if your native language might be Pashto or something, and your higher ed is only in English, but you haven't really been educated in English through most of your career. So there's so many of this, and I've seen this in countries all over the world where access, even in South Korea, right? Engineering, scientific textbooks aren't really written. Right. It's not economically viable to translate all those textbooks. So
there's so many questions. I see time is running short. So let's take a few other questions first. Then we can perhaps comment together. Okay. On this side, I saw quite a few hands. Yes, Yuri.
To speak to this gentleman's question, don't private companies benefit from government grants and research from universities? And it's not just theirs, it's not just Johnson & Johnson or whomever. And I just also wanted to make a comment. On the way up here, I was listening to a thing on NPR, and they were talking about the cuts that they've done to NOAA, and that actually probably precipitated all of the landslides and flooding that they had in Alaska. So, I mean, it was immediate.
Right.
So, but anyway, do they benefit from grants from the government? Is it all private funding for any kind of research, medical research, drug research, new drugs? Don't they benefit from governments and universities?
Let's take one more question. Professor Jackson, you had a question? Yes.
This is primarily directed to Professor Ashford, but I believe there are implications for both of you. I'm wondering about the addressees of these rights. And Professor Ashford, you, I think rightly, criticized Thomas Poga for specifying the addressee of the rights that you're talking about as being what's called the Global Basic Economic Order, for those who haven't read Poga, the GBEO, and those institutions and their officers, whereas in fact you say the proper addressees are all individuals who benefit from this arrangement, that is, that the GBEO does bend toward the North and the West. My question is whether or not, even though the responsibility is on each individual who benefits, is the GBEO still the proper forum for redress or not? And if you can sort of apply that to science as well, who are the addressees in your mind? Thank you.
Right.
Do you want to start with that last
Professor Ashford, would you like to
question?
comment first?
Yes, yeah, no,
Yeah,
thank you.
be very brief.
Yeah, very
Brief.
Yeah, just on that last question. So basically, Polga's view is that the problem is that with the decisions made by agents of this coercive global institutional order, and I think actually a lot of the problem is the absence of global social institutions and the absence of legal mechanisms to solve coordination problems, which is where I think part of the remedy is. So I think the focus should be away from, well, we tend to think of human rights violations in terms of identifying kind of evil perpetrators, and I think we need to have a more forward-looking focus. What steps need to be taken to remedy these problems, and what kind of institutional reforms are needed.
Okay, Professor Robinson?
I guess I'll wait for the microphone.
We have to be quick, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're now on the cusp of a worldwide cultural revolution with the advent of AI. And then you must have some thoughts about how that might affect prospects for both the right to subsistence and the right to science and other things. So I'd just like to hear what you're thinking. Thank you.
You guys are asking all the difficult questions. It's amazing.
Not enough time.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just quick question.
Yeah, you know, just to the previous questions too.
Yeah.
Is that okay? to
Yeah,
answer
very,
those?
very briefly.
Yeah. On the language side, you know, my original language primary language is Danish, but that doesn't function anymore as an academic language. I do not write anything in Danish other than when I disseminate for the Danish public. So if you are, like some of my colleagues in the Danish department are historians of Danish, you know, you feel a real loss because you have to now address a global audience, and every time you do something, you can take nothing for granted. You have to, like, half your article before you get to your point has to explain what this country, this small little country in the north of Europe is all about. So one of the big issues of cultural rights is exactly language. The right to your own language it takes up a lot of space and a lot of energy in the cultural rights discourse. But let's face it, everything I do is in English. I wouldn't do anything else. Private companies, that's a very, very interesting and very important question you raised. It isn't all bad, of course. Where would we be without, you know, the kind of private-public interface is really important. As long as the funding from private foundations, private sources, doesn't come with strings attached. That's the only thing. That's what I'm afraid of. And I see more and more money in Denmark, at least in my own backyard, coming from private foundations such as the Novo Nordisk Foundation. Have you heard of that? They today say they're the largest in the world. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what they claim to be. And they drive forward what they call mission-driven research. So it's research that goes toward a particular, you know, they want this or that to be researched on, this or that theme, this or that topic. So my worry is sometimes, what about basic research? Sometimes, you know, we don't know until 30, 40, 50 years later what it is that can all of a sudden be used, can be applied in other ways. So mission-driven research is not good for kind of basic research, not always. And if private funding comes in the form only of mission-driven research funding with certain strings attached, then there are problems.
We have been hearing from Professor Ashford and Postrom, and so many questions and so many hands I get to see, answers. We don't get a chance to respond. Time is running short. Nick, how much more time can we have? 5 more minutes?
AI, we didn't get to AI.
We can go just a few minutes.
We didn't get to that
Or we can
question.
go, 3 to 5 more minutes.
Okay, very good. So 1 or 2 quick questions.
No, we still need to address the AI question.
Yeah, right. But most of that is, or not all of them could be answered. We'd like to hear also their views, their sides.
Okay.
These are questions raised, for that we all can think together, So I just 1 or 2 questions, and then we'd like to hear some concluding comments, and then I would like to say 1 or 2 words quickly. So any other, yeah?
I just had a quick question. I'm sure you can hear me.
Yeah, but
a lot of American public, we think about science, it's so tied to economics, and it's tied to the government. We heard many questions today. Half of it was economics. How can we benefit off monetarily from science? The other half was, how can we fight this government that's trying to reduce our access to science?
Mm-hmm.
As the American public, coming from a different country, I'm sure you have great perspectives that we need to hear. How can the American public change the way that we think about science and have it be maybe a free resource rather than a paid resource? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the right to science, I don't know, would you?
No, you go ahead.
Should I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
The important thing, I think, about right to science is that it's about the right to scientific knowledge and its products. So it's not just about the products of science, it's also about scientific knowledge itself. And we know from the framers how important it was for them to make sure that people got access to knowledge, which was also good for democratic society, so that they knew when they voted on something, they were knowledgeable. So that knowledge is important. It's not just about applied science, and that has to be stressed, I think, often. In the American context, of course, I have had this nerdy interest in the right to science for the longest time, and nobody really has listened much to that until now, because the American context is quite obviously a problem in terms of the right to science. So what you guys can learn, I'm not sure, other than talk about it, get it out there, and say that we're not just talking about economics, we're talking about knowledge as a privilege, as something that's important for democracies as a whole.
Okay. You see, so you had a question before already? Yeah. So we have so many other hands, so we cannot get into anybody that we haven't heard. Yes, from you. Quickly.
My question is mostly about just like the framework. For science to be viewed as a human right, do the people who study this, do they understand science and technological progress in terms of, it having being value laden, having certain political perspectives that science privileges, or is it more that the technology is understood in a more value neutral sense? And what are the implications of that in the policy making and in the research?
It's a big question. Let's keep that in mind. Let's get to the next question right here on the front row. And then in the closing comments, perhaps you can sum up a few of your ideas together.
To those who heavily depend on AI, how can we fight against the biases of AI? Going into gender bias or race bias responses?
Right. Yeah. These are great questions, and so many hands. I see we don't have time, really. So do you like to have some closing statement that would respond to some of these questions? Mm-hmm. And then 1 minute or 2, and then Elizabeth does that, then I will say.
Do you want to start?
Okay, go ahead.
You ask all the, you touch all the sore spots.
Yeah.
You raise all the relevant issues here, so that's a great audience. And AI, I think, and we to your question too, in the context of AI, so much of this comes up and will have to be discussed. And AI to me is the best example of something that can really benefit humanity, but can also create problems for us. So can we perhaps again use a right to science? The wording of Article 15 is wonderful, and I'm going to talk about that more tomorrow night. But that wording in the international documents, can we use that to raise these issues and to make sure that we see things from all of these different angles, so that we get to make it possible? We should not shut down research on AI, of course. Whenever it's a good thing and it benefits all of us, we need that in our societies. But we also need that human-centered kind of practice there as well, I think.
Well, that's where Elizabeth comes in, your point, sustainability in the other side, to bridge that gap between science and human rights regarding sustainability. Can you comment on that, your concluding comment?
Yes, I mean, I think one thing that's really valuable about the human rights framing is it's based, as you mentioned, on the dignity of everyone. And I think it can be a tool for inspiring the kind of coordination that we need. I mean, if you think about the origin of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the aftermath of the atrocities of the Second World War, and this, which galvanized this genuinely global movement to think about how we can actually live together as humankind better. And I think law is absolutely crucial to achieving that kind of coordination.
Truly. One or two quick comments, we talked about rights all along. We didn't talk too much about justice, but it's through justice we can bring in the two sides together, sustainability and science. I talked about Niels Bohr, what he gave us to show two sides, science and peace. They go together. That's Professor Åström country, Denmark, but also Scotland. Scotland gave us Adam Smith, father of capitalism. He was also the one who brought in the idea of moral sentiment as an important factor in human rights and also in global justice. So two sides go together, you see? So Adam also, Scotland gave us modernity in the Western world. Adam Smith, steam engine, and David Hume, skepticism. So can you imagine? So we have so much to learn from these two countries and from the two top-notch speakers, representative of these two cultures and countries, two of us here. So we are very grateful to have them over here. There's so many issues raised. We could not respond to all of them, but you all heard them. But they will be giving a longer, more systematic, treatment of these issues tomorrow at the talk at Westminster at 7 o'clock. Please try to come there. And one last question.
I have something to say.
Okay.
I graduated from the philosophy department in 1994 at the age of 48. Dean was one of my professors. These young women all back here left, but I want to say to the rest of you young women, don't let the guys take over. If you want gender justice, you have to speak up. And there were only 2 women who asked questions besides, you did. But you're older. But no, you've got to speak
You're not a woman here.
I'm amazed that here we are this many years later and the women are not speaking up. So thank you for speaking up.
Yeah.
And you too.
Here. Yeah, we should give thanks to our 2 speakers over here. Wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Right.
Thank you guys for coming to today's forum. Feel free to hang out and ask questions. And thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
There is pizza, plenty of pizza to grab on your way out. Everybody can have a couple slices.